Hi, grade threes. We are going to be looking at a book called Beethoven Lives Upstairs. Basically, it is a collection of letters between Christoph and Christoph's uncle, and it is about the relationship as it changes between Christoph and Beethoven. I will tell you no more about it because I will ask you to listen for some questions and answers from the notes. On Thursday, March 29, 1827, the people of Vienna flooded into the streets. They came to pay their respects to Ludwig van Beethoven, the great composer, who had died 3 days earlier. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 9 priests blessed the coffin, and the funeral procession left Mr. Beethoven's house for the church. So dense were the crowds that the one-block journey took an hour and a half. I wasn't in Vienna at the time. I was a student of music in Salzburg at the time, but if you had looked carefully, you might have seen my nephew, a little boy with a serious face. He is Christoph, and there was a time when he came to know Mr. Beethoven quite well. It was not a happy time in Christoph's life. He was only 10 years old, and his father had recently died. The first of Christoph's letters arrived at my door in the autumn of 1822. I was surprised that he had written. I had not seen my nephew for some years. Dear Uncle, September 7, 1822. I hope you will remember me. It is Christoph, your nephew, who writes. As to the reason, I will not keep you in suspense. I write, Uncle, because something terrible has happened. A madman has moved into our house. Do you remember that when Father died, Mother decided to rent out his office upstairs? Well, she has done it, and Ludwig van Beethoven has moved in. Every morning at dawn, Mr. Beethoven begins to make his dreadful noises upstairs. Loud poundings and howlings come through the floor. They are like the sounds of an injured beast. All morning Mr. Beethoven carries on this way. After lunch, he storms into the street. He comes home, sometimes long after the house is quiet for the night, tracking mud and stamping his way up the stairs above our heads. Mother says I mustn't blame him. He's deaf and he can't hear the noise he makes. But he wakes up the twins and they start their crying. They cry all day. Uncle, I must make this one request. I beg you, please tell my mother to send Mr. Beethoven away. Your nephew, Christoph. October 10, 1822. My dear Christoph, I arrived home last night to find your letter on the table in the hall. Do I remember you? Of course I do. I should tell you that I have received a letter from your mother as well. As you know, she is concerned about you and wants you to be happy. She assures me that Mr. Beethoven is peculiar, perhaps, but certainly not mad. Christoph, Mr. Beethoven will settle in soon, I am sure. I know that life will be more peaceful before long. Your uncle, Carl. Having answered my nephew's letter, I left Salzburg for some weeks on matters related to my studies. In truth, I expected no further messages. The 3 letters that followed arrived in my absence. October 22, 1822. Dear Uncle, I hope you will forgive my troubling you, but I am sure that you will want to hear this news. Our family is now the laughingstock of Vienna. I opened the door this morning to find a crowd in front of our house. They were looking up at Mr. Beethoven's window and laughing. So I looked up too. Oh my, there was Mr. Beethoven staring at a sheet of music. And Uncle, he had no clothes on at all. It was a dreadful sight. You should have seen him setting out for the afternoon. He hums to himself. He growls out tunes, he waves his arms, his pockets bulge with papers and pencils. On the street, the children run up and call him names. Mr. Beethoven is so famous that sometimes people stop outside our house hoping they will see him. But if anyone asks, I say he's moved away. Your nephew, Christoph. Have a look at the picture and see if you can see what Christoph is talking about. We're going to use this last letter, October 29, 1822. Dear Uncle, I have now seen with my own eyes that Mr. Beethoven is completely mad. I will tell you the story in the hope that you will do something at last. Last night, when I was getting ready for bed, I happened to look up. There were beads of water collecting on the ceiling above my head. As usual, Mother was busy with the twins, so I climbed the stairs and crept along the hall to Mr. Beethoven's room. I looked in. He was standing there with no shirt on. He had a jug of water in his hands. He was pouring the water over his head right there in the middle of the room, and all the time stamping his feet like he was marching or listening to a song. You should see my father's study. Do you remember how tidy he was? Well, now there are papers lying everywhere, on the floor, on the chairs, and clothing crumpled on the floor. And another thing, this is horrible, he has been writing on the wall with a pencil. I said nothing to Mr. Beethoven, of course. Luckily, he didn't even see me, and I ran back down the stairs. Uncle, if you are thinking of coming to our aid, there could be no better time than now. Christoph. So grade 3s, we're going to stop that lesson today. We'll continue next time I see you.